New York City, December 1799. A young woman named Elma Sands, whispered to her friends that she was soon to be married. She left her boarding house one cold evening, never to return alive. Days later, her lifeless body was discovered at the bottom of a dark, icy well in Manhattan. The city erupted in shock and anger. Whispers of betrayal, secrecy, and murder spread like wildfire through the streets. Who killed Elma Sands? Why was she found in such a gruesome way? And how did one young man's trial become the very first major murder case in American history? Before we dive into this chilling tale, I want to hear from you. What do you think truly happened that night in 1799? Was Levi Weeks guilty, or was he a scapegoat of circumstance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe for more untold true crime stories, and stay with me as we unravel America's first sensational trial. The winter of 1799 in New York was bitterly cold, yet the city was alive with energy. The Revolutionary War had ended only 16 years earlier, and New York was beginning to transform from a colonial settlement into a bustling metropolis. But behind the rapid growth and ambition of the city, darkness lingered in narrow alleys, taverns, and poorly lit streets. Crime was not uncommon, yet no event had shocked the city quite like the mysterious death of a young woman named Elma Sands. Elma Sands was just 22 years old, living in a boarding house run by her cousin Catherine Ring. By all accounts, she was cheerful, lively, and well-liked among her peers. She had hopes of marriage and a future filled with promise. In particular, she had grown close to a young man named Levi Weeks, an ambitious carpenter from a respected family. Their relationship quickly became the subject of gossip in the boarding house, for it seemed the two were more than just friends. Some whispered they planned to marry in secret. On December 22, 1799, Elma confided to her cousin and other women in the house that Levi intended to marry her that very evening. The young woman seemed both excited and nervous. She put on her best clothes, braving the cold night with the expectation that she would return as a bride. She left the boarding house around 8 p.m., seen leaving in the company of Levi Weeks. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. When Elma failed to return that night, worry spread through the household. By the next morning, anxiety had turned into dread. Days passed with no word from Elma, until on January 2, 1800, her body was discovered in a well on the property of Lispenard Meadows, an area north of the developed city. This well, later known as the Manhattan Well, was deep and filled with icy water. The scene was gruesome, her lifeless form pulled from the darkness, bruises marking her body, her clothing torn. News of the discovery traveled swiftly, sparking outrage across New York. The public was furious. A young woman had been murdered, her body discarded like refuse in a well, and suspicion quickly fell upon one man, Levi Weeks. After all, he had been seen with her the night she vanished. He had courted her, perhaps even promised marriage. But if that were true, why had she ended up dead? Levi Weeks was no ordinary man in New York society. He was the younger brother of Ezra Weeks, a wealthy and influential builder who had powerful connections. Ezra's business had ties to elite figures, including Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, both prominent lawyers and politicians. When Levi was accused of murder, Ezra used his influence to secure the best legal defense possible for his younger brother. The trial of Levi Weeks began swiftly. In January 1800, just days after Elma's body was discovered, crowds packed the courtroom, eager to witness the sensational proceedings. This was more than a murder trial. It was a public spectacle, the first of its kind in American history. Never before had New York seen such intense attention given to a criminal case. The evidence against Levi seemed straightforward at first glance. Witnesses testified that Elma had spoken of marrying Levi the very night she disappeared. Others said they had seen the two leaving together. The timeline pointed directly at him. But in the courtroom, things became less clear. Levi's defense team, composed of none other than Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr, and Brockholst Livingston, argued vigorously on his behalf. They painted Levi as innocent, a victim of circumstance and malicious rumor. They suggested that Elma might have gone to the well on her own, or that someone else entirely had been responsible for her death. The defense also questioned the credibility of the witnesses. Some accounts conflicted, others were vague. The lack of direct evidence, no one had seen Levi harm Elma, was emphasized. The jury listened intently as the lawyers dismantled the prosecution's case piece by piece. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, the public seethed. Many believed justice was being manipulated by wealth and power. The presence of Hamilton and Burr only heightened the drama. These men were among the most famous figures in the young republic, and here they were, defending a man accused of murdering an innocent woman. To the common people, it seemed like a display of privilege overshadowing truth. The trial lasted only 2 days, yet it left an indelible mark on history. Witnesses were examined and cross-examined, emotions ran high, and the jury deliberated. Ultimately, Levi Weeks was acquitted of the murder of Elma Sands. The verdict shocked many. For the public, it felt like an injustice, a miscarriage of truth. How could the man last seen with Elma, the man she claimed would marry her that night, walk free? But legally, the defense had raised enough doubt. Without concrete evidence, the jury could not convict. Levi left the courtroom a free man, yet his reputation never recovered. He soon left New York entirely, relocating to Mississippi, where he lived out the rest of his life far from the scandal that had engulfed him. The case, however, did not fade from memory. For years, whispers of Elma Sands' murder lingered. Many continued to believe Levi was guilty, despite his acquittal. Others speculated on alternate theories. Perhaps Elma had taken her own life. Perhaps another man was involved. Perhaps secrets lay buried in the Lisbonard meadows. What is certain is that the Manhattan Well murder changed New York forever. It was the first trial in the United States to be extensively covered by the press, the first to capture the public's imagination in such a way. It highlighted the power of influence, the role of public opinion, and the challenges of seeking justice in a society where wealth could sway outcomes. Elma Sands, once just a young woman with dreams of marriage, became a tragic symbol of injustice. The well where her body was found became infamous, a grim reminder of her fate. For decades, people pointed to it as a place of sorrow, even as the city grew around it. Today, the site of the Manhattan Well remains a part of New York's haunted past, a story retold in whispers and historical accounts. Her death and the trial of Levi Weeks echo through history not only as a mystery unsolved, but as a milestone in America's legal and cultural development. It raised questions about the rights of victims, the influence of the powerful, and the meaning of justice. So, the story of Elma Sands is not merely a tale of one woman's tragic end. It is a reflection of a young nation grappling with morality, law, and the voices of its people. The Manhattan Well murder continues to haunt us, because it reminds us that sometimes truth drowns in silence, leaving only questions that time cannot answer. Do you believe justice was served in America's very first murder trial? Was Levi Weeks truly innocent, or did power and influence shield him from the gallows? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know your verdict. Don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten crime stories from history that still haunt us today. When the jury announced Levi Weeks' acquittal on January 31st, 1800, the courtroom buzzed with a mix of shock, disbelief, and anger. For many ordinary New Yorkers, the verdict seemed a betrayal. A young woman had been found dead, her body dumped in a well, and yet the man last seen with her was walking free. To them, it appeared that justice had been purchased by wealth, connections, and the silver tongues of America's most brilliant lawyers. The trial had lasted just 2 days, an astonishingly short period for a case that involved the death of a young woman. But those 2 days set precedents that echoed throughout American legal history. For one, the proceedings were meticulously transcribed, making it the first fully recorded murder trial in the United States. This record allowed the public, historians, and legal scholars to examine every word, every argument, and every piece of testimony, ensuring that the case would never be forgotten. The courthouse was packed from morning until night during the trial. Citizens squeezed into every corner, desperate to hear the testimonies. The air was heavy, not only with the smell of damp coats and wood smoke, but with tension. Women whispered prayers for Elma Sands, while men muttered about corruption and privilege. The prosecution's case rested on circumstantial evidence. They emphasized that Elma had told her cousin and others she was to be married to Levi that night. Witnesses confirmed she left the boarding house in his company. Others claimed they heard struggling near the well. But when pressed for details, accounts conflicted. Was it truly Levi's voice they heard? Could it have been someone else? The defense, led by Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr, and Brockholst Livingston, exploited these gaps with surgical precision. Hamilton, with his commanding presence and sharp intellect, dismantled witness credibility point by point. Burr, equally cunning, appealed to logic and the principle of reasonable doubt. Livingston tied it all together, weaving a narrative that painted Levi as a victim of gossip and assumption. They argued that there was no direct evidence linking Levi to Elma's death. No one had seen him push her, strike her, or lead her to the well. Could it not be that Elma had gone there herself? Perhaps she fell, or perhaps, though few dared to say it outright, she ended her own life. By the end of their arguments, the jury had enough doubt to let Levi walk free. The verdict, however, left scars on New York's collective conscience. Many believed that if Levi had been a poor laborer without connections, he would have been convicted and possibly hanged. His brother Ezra's wealth and influence had bought him the finest legal minds of the age. Hamilton and Burr were not just lawyers. They were towering political figures, men whose names were already etched into America's founding story. Their involvement made the trial more than a legal proceeding. It was a performance that revealed how deeply power could tilt the scales of justice. Ordinary citizens left the courthouse muttering curses under their breath. Women wept for Elma. Men shook their heads at the corruption they believed they had witnessed. Newspapers carried the story for weeks, feeding the outrage. And yet, the law had spoken. Levi Weeks was acquitted. For Levi himself, freedom came with a heavy cost. Though legally absolved, he was condemned in the court of public opinion. Whispers followed him wherever he went. Boarding houses would not take him in. Employers hesitated to associate with him. The name Levi Weeks had become synonymous with scandal, and New York was not a forgiving city. Eventually, Levi made the decision to leave. He could no longer live among those who looked at him as a murderer who had escaped punishment. He traveled south, settling in Mississippi, where he tried to rebuild his life. There, far from the haunted well and the whispers of New York, he worked as a builder and lived until 1819. He died at the age of 43, never fully escaping the shadow of Elma Sands. The well itself became an infamous landmark. For years, people pointed it out to visitors, calling it cursed. Locals avoided it after dark, believing Elma's spirit lingered there, restless and vengeful. Children were warned not to play near it, and some swore they heard cries echoing from its depths at night. As New York grew and expanded, the Lispenard Meadows disappeared beneath development. The well was eventually capped and built over, but its dark history was not forgotten. Even today, the story of the Manhattan Well remains one of the city's most chilling legends, whispered in hushed tones among those who love tales of ghosts and mysteries. What made this case extraordinary was not only the crime, but the way it was remembered. The Manhattan Well murder became the prototype for America's fascination with true crime. It was the first time a murder trial had been reported with such detail, the first time the public followed every twist and turn, the first time outrage was stoked by perceptions of privilege in the justice system. The trial also foreshadowed conflicts that would erupt later in American history. Hamilton and Burr, once united in defense of Levi Weeks, would face each other as bitter enemies only 4 years later in their infamous duel, where Hamilton lost his life. Some speculated that their partnership in the Weeks trial was one of the last times the two men stood side by side, before ambition and rivalry tore them apart. For women, Elma's death was particularly haunting. She had been young, hopeful, dreaming of marriage and a future, only to end in betrayal and violence. Her story became a cautionary tale about trust, about the vulnerability of women in a society where their voices carried little weight in the courtroom. The fact that her killer, if indeed Levi was guilty, walked free, only deepened the wound. More than 2 centuries later, the case remains unsolved in the minds of many. Was Levi Weeks truly guilty? Did he lead Elma to the well, perhaps under the guise of marriage, only to betray her? Or was he a convenient scapegoat, a young man caught in the web of suspicion while the true killer slipped away? Some historians suggest that Elma may have been pregnant, which would explain her desperation to marry Levi quickly. If true, it would have given Levi motive to rid himself of responsibility. Others argue that Elma's death may have been the result of another suitor, or perhaps even an accident. The truth may never be known. What remains is a tragedy that captured the soul of a city and the imagination of a nation. The Manhattan Well murder was not just about Elma and Levi. It was about justice, power, and the questions that arise when the two collide. In the end, Elma Sands was laid to rest, mourned by those who loved her. But her memory lived on in the whispers of New Yorkers. Levi Weeks lived free, but never truly escaped the shadow of accusation. And the Manhattan Well, dark and silent, stood as a grim reminder of a night in December 1799, when innocence drowned and justice was left uncertain. The trial of Levi Weeks was more than the story of one man and one woman. It was the birth of America, its obsession with crime, scandal, and courtroom drama. It showed that in the young republic, as in all societies, truth and justice were not always the same. More than 2 centuries later, the Manhattan Well murder still raises one haunting question. Was Levi Weeks truly innocent, or did privilege bury the truth? Share your honest verdict in the comments below. I want to hear your theory. And don't forget to subscribe for more chilling historical true crime stories that history books often leave untold. The acquittal of Levi Weeks did not close the story of the Manhattan Well murder. In fact, it opened new chapters written not only in court records but in newspapers, pamphlets, and whispered rumors that spread throughout New York City for decades. Part 3 of this tragic saga explores the legacy of the trial, the role of the press, the lives of the men who defended Levi, and the way Elma Sands' ghost became embedded in New York's folklore. The trial of Levi Weeks occurred at a time when America was still shaping its identity, not only politically but socially. Newspapers were becoming a powerful force in shaping public opinion. The case of Elma Sands was one of the first times the press devoted front-page attention to a crime and its courtroom proceedings. Journalists described the packed courtroom, the testimonies, and the strategies of the defense lawyers in vivid detail. For many New Yorkers who could not fit inside the courthouse, the daily news became their lifeline to the unfolding drama. And what the press revealed was more than a murder trial. It was a portrait of a society struggling with inequality, privilege, and justice. Many papers sided with the public's anger. They painted Levi as a man who escaped punishment because of his powerful brother and his wealthy lawyers. Others, however, emphasized the importance of reasonable doubt, defending the jury's verdict. The divide reflected a larger tension in American society. Was justice truly blind, or was it already favoring the rich? The press also immortalized Elma as a tragic heroine. Writers described her as young, innocent, and betrayed, a woman who dreamed of marriage but found only death. In doing so, they turned her into a symbol of female vulnerability in a world dominated by male power, both in personal relationships and in the courtroom. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Manhattan Well trial was the presence of 2 men who would later face each other in one of the most famous duels in American history, Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. At the trial, they stood side by side, united in defense of Levi Weeks. Both were brilliant lawyers, skilled in rhetoric and persuasion. Hamilton commanded the room with sharp intellect and fiery passion, while Burr worked with calculated precision, appealing to reason and cool logic. Together with Brockholst Livingston, they formed a defense team unlike any seen before. For Hamilton, the case offered an opportunity to display his mastery of legal argument. For Burr, it was a chance to further solidify his reputation as a lawyer and statesman. Yet within just a few years, the alliance would collapse. By 1804, Hamilton and Burr were bitter enemies. their political rivalry culminating in the infamous duel in Weehawken, New Jersey, where Hamilton was fatally shot. Looking back, historians often view their joint defense of Levi Weeks as one of the last moments the two men worked together, before ambition and resentment drove them apart forever. The irony is haunting. In defending a man accused of murder, they were bound together. But in their own personal conflict, they reenacted the tragedy of violence, this time leaving Hamilton dead and Burr disgraced. At the heart of the Manhattan Well case lies a deeper story about class and gender in early America. Elma Sands was a young woman of modest background. She lived in a boarding house, her security dependent on her cousin Catherine Ring. Her value in society was tied to her reputation and prospects for marriage. When she claimed Levi Weeks promised to marry her, her fate was sealed in a way. If she had been pregnant, as some speculated, her desperation to marry quickly would have been understandable. Unwed mothers in 1799 faced shame, isolation, and economic ruin. In this context, Elma's reliance on Levi was not just emotional but existential. Levi, by contrast, came from a well-connected family. His brother Ezra was wealthy and influential, tied to the city's most powerful networks. When suspicion fell on him, he was able to summon the best lawyers in the nation. This stark contrast highlighted how class determined not only opportunities in life, but also outcomes in death. The jury's decision to acquit, whether justified or not, was shaped by this imbalance. Elma had no voice in the courtroom. Her story was told by others. Levi had Hamilton and Burr speaking for him. The case became a symbolic battle between the powerless and the powerful, one that resonates with modern audiences still skeptical of whether justice is truly impartial. One of the most overlooked figures in this tragedy is Catherine Ring, Elma's cousin and guardian. She had taken Elma into her boarding house, provided her with shelter, and loved her like family. It was Catherine who heard Elma's hopeful words on that December evening, that she was to be married to Levi. For Catherine, the discovery of Elma's body was devastating. She testified at the trial, recounting what Elma had told her, only to watch as Levi walked free. For the rest of her life, she lived under the shadow of grief and unanswered questions. The boarding house never felt the same again, and Catherine's name was forever linked to the case. As years passed, Elma's story took on a supernatural dimension. Locals began whispering that her spirit haunted the area around the Manhattan Well. Some claimed they heard weeping at night, or that they saw a pale figure near the site. Others insisted her ghost appeared to young women, warning them about betrayal and false promises. These ghostly tales turned the Manhattan Well into a site of morbid fascination. Visitors came to see it, shuddering as they peered into its depths. Parents told their children not to linger near it after sunset. The legend of Elma's restless spirit became part of New York's folklore, blending history with superstition. Even today, the site, now hidden beneath modern buildings, remains a place of curiosity for those interested in haunted New York. Ghost tours often include the story of Elma Sands, describing her as one of the city's earliest and most tragic phantoms. While the story of Elma Sands is often told as a ghost tale or a romantic tragedy, its importance to American history cannot be overlooked. The Manhattan Well trial was the first major murder trial in the United States to be fully recorded. It set a precedent for transparency in legal proceedings, showing how the public and press could hold the system accountable. It also revealed the flaws in that system. The trial demonstrated how wealth and connections could sway outcomes, raising questions that Americans still wrestle with today about equality before the law. For legal historians, the trial stands as a turning point, a moment when American justice became both a public spectacle and a matter of national debate. The Manhattan Well murder is more than just a story from 1799. It is a mirror reflecting timeless truths about power, privilege, gender, and justice. Elma Sands, a young woman full of hope, became a symbol of betrayal and injustice. Levi Weeks, whether guilty or not, became a man forever shadowed by suspicion. Hamilton and Burr, defenders of Levi, would later face each other in a duel that symbolized the destructive force of ambition and rivalry. The well itself, dark and silent, became a monument of sorrow. And the questions it raised: who killed Elma Sands? Was justice done? linger to this day. Every city has its ghosts, and for New York, Elma Sands remains one of the most haunting. The Manhattan Well murder wasn't just a crime. It changed how America viewed justice, power, and the press. Do you think Elma's death shaped the way we tell true crime stories today? Share your theory in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more hidden history and haunting mysteries that deserve to be remembered. The trial of Levi Weeks did not fade quietly into history. Instead, it planted deep roots in the American consciousness, influencing law, society, and even culture for generations to come. Part 4 of this story looks at the legacy left behind, the impact on New York's legal system, the evolving conversation about women's rights, and how this case laid the groundwork for America's obsession with true crime narratives. In 1799, newspapers were not yet the sprawling networks we know today. But the coverage of the Manhattan Well murder proved something critical: crime sells. Readers devoured every update about Elma Sands, her mysterious death, and the sensational trial that followed. Pamphlets were printed and distributed, recounting the trial in detail. Some sold for pennies on the street, while others were handed out in taverns and coffee houses where people debated late into the night. For the first time in American history, a single criminal case captivated an entire city. This was the seed of America's true crime obsession. Long before podcasts, documentaries, or Netflix series, people gathered to read about Elma Sands. They wanted every detail: the horror of her body pulled from the icy well, the whispers of betrayal, the dazzling speeches of Hamilton and Burr. And once the trial ended, they weren't ready to let the story go. From that moment forward, Americans expected their newspapers to cover crime not just as fact, but as gripping narrative. The Manhattan Well murder became the template for every high-profile case that followed. Equally important was the precedent set in the courtroom. The Weeks trial was the first fully recorded murder trial in the United States. Every testimony, every cross-examination, every ruling was transcribed and preserved. This mattered enormously. For the first time, ordinary citizens could read what actually happened in court. They didn't have to rely only on rumors or biased reporting. They could study the trial itself. It was a small but crucial step toward transparency in the justice system. The trial also highlighted the concept of reasonable doubt in a way Americans had not seen before. Hamilton, Burr, and Livingston leaned heavily on the idea that unless guilt could be proven beyond question, Levi must walk free. Their defense strategy emphasized logic over passion, facts over suspicion. Though many believed Levi guilty, the jury's acquittal reinforced an important principle: it is better to let a guilty man go free than to convict an innocent one. This idea, controversial then and debated still today, became a bedrock of American law. While the trial shaped law and media, it also cast a harsh light on the role of women in early America. Elma Sands' life and death symbolized the limited power women held at the time. Her entire identity in the courtroom was mediated by others. She could not speak for herself, so her cousin Catherine Ring testified about Elma's last words and hopes. Elma's friends recounted what she had told them about marriage, but Elma's own voice, her own story, was silenced. Some historians argue that Elma's case exposed how vulnerable women were to betrayal and violence in a society where their reputations determined their future. If Elma had been pregnant, as rumors suggested, her desperation for marriage revealed the stakes: respectability, security, and survival. The outrage that followed her death planted quiet seeds for change. Women began demanding greater protections, not just socially, but legally. Though it would be decades before women's rights movements gained momentum, tragedies like Elma's showed the urgent need for reform. For Levi, acquittal was not freedom. Though he avoided execution, his name was permanently stained. He left New York, moving to Mississippi, where he tried to rebuild his life as a builder and craftsman. But history did not forget him. For decades, pamphlets and retellings painted Levi as a man who had cheated justice. His family's connections, his powerful lawyers, his brother's influence, all were seen as shields that protected him from the gallows. Whether he was guilty or innocent, he carried the reputation of a murderer. Levi's story reminds us that while courts can deliver verdicts, society often delivers its own judgment. The involvement of Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr gave the case even greater historical weight. In 1800, they were still allies in the courtroom. By 1804, they were mortal enemies. Their infamous duel at Weehawken cast a retroactive shadow over the Manhattan Well trial. People later looked back and marveled that the two men, once united in defending Levi Weeks, ended up pointing pistols at each other across the Hudson River. Hamilton's death in that duel turned him into a martyr of Federalist ideals, while Burr lived out his life disgraced. In a strange twist, the Manhattan Well trial became a footnote in the larger story of Hamilton and Burr, showing how even great figures in history intersected with the fate of an ordinary young woman named Elma Sands. As New York grew into a metropolis, the memory of the well lingered. Locals swore it was haunted. Tales spread of Elma's ghost crying for justice, of strange lights flickering near the site, of icy drafts chilling anyone who passed too close. Parents used her story to warn their daughters about men's false promises. Writers used her ghost to symbolize betrayal and injustice. Even in the 19th century, guidebooks to New York mentioned the Manhattan Well as a place of dark history. Today, the well still exists, hidden beneath a modern building in Soho. Though capped and no longer in use, it remains a site of fascination for ghost hunters, historians, and those who believe the past never truly dies. What makes the Manhattan Well murder so significant is not only the tragedy of Elma Sands, but how it shaped America's culture. It was the first case to show how crime could capture public imagination, the first to test the transparency of a young legal system, and the first to reveal the sharp divide between wealth and ordinary citizens in matters of justice. It also revealed something about human nature, our need to tell and retell stories of violence, betrayal, and mystery. From 1799 to today, the fascination has not faded. Every generation rediscovers Elma Sands asking again, who killed her, and why? The Manhattan Well murder is not simply the story of a crime. It is a story about America itself, its justice system, its press, its treatment of women, its obsession with scandal. Elma Sands may have died in 1799, but her story continues to echo. In every true crime podcast, every courtroom drama, every debate about privilege and justice, her shadow lingers. Her body may have been pulled from a dark well, but her memory rises again and again, demanding that we remember, question, and reflect. So, 2 centuries later, the question remains unanswered. Was Levi Weeks an innocent man wrongfully accused, or a guilty one who slipped through the cracks of justice? What do you think? Was Levi Weeks a victim of circumstance or a guilty man who slipped through the cracks of justice? Your opinion matters. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Let's debate this mystery together. And don't forget, subscribe so you never miss gripping stories of unsolved crimes and chilling history. The verdict in Levi Weeks' trial did not silence the city of New York. If anything, the echoes of the Manhattan Well murder continued to resound long after the courtroom emptied and Levi walked free. The community remained haunted, newspapers remained relentless, and the legend of Elma Sands, the young woman who vanished into the cold night only to be found lifeless at the bottom of a well, took on a life of its own. What began as a tragedy of 2 young people and a suspicious romance evolved into a narrative about law, justice, and society in America's early years. To understand the full scope of the Manhattan Well murder, one must examine what came after the trial, how it shaped public discourse, and the way it continues to intrigue generations even today. When the jury announced Levi Weeks' acquittal, shock rippled through New York. For many, the verdict was more scandalous than the crime itself. Citizens had followed the story from the discovery of Elma's body, through the frenzy of public speculation, and into the tense courtroom where emotions overflowed. They had expected closure. Instead, they felt cheated. For the ordinary people of New York, the case embodied something more than a love affair gone wrong. It was seen as a test of whether wealth and connections could bend justice. Levi, though not rich in his own right, belonged to a prominent family. His brother Ezra Weeks was a well-known builder connected with influential patrons like Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. Their direct involvement in his defense raised questions about fairness. As a result, many believed Elma had been betrayed twice, first by the man she trusted and then by the system meant to protect her. Gossip flourished in taverns, on street corners and in churchyards. Pamphlets and broadsides sold rapidly, spreading exaggerated tales of betrayal, romance, and ghostly retribution. The public fascination with the case ensured that neither Levi Weeks nor the name Elma Sands would fade quickly. Though Levi escaped the gallows, freedom did not mean peace. His family bore the weight of suspicion. Ezra Weeks, despite his reputation as a builder of distinction, faced whispers that his influence had bought Levi's acquittal. Friends turned cold, business partners grew hesitant, and the name Weeks became tied to scandal. Levi himself found it impossible to reintegrate into New York society. Everywhere he turned, he was met with stares, suspicion, and hostility. Some whispered that he was a murderer who had been shielded by powerful men. Others claimed that, innocent or not, his reputation was irreparably stained. Recognizing the impossibility of building a future in New York, Levi eventually left the city, seeking refuge elsewhere. Records suggest he moved south, where anonymity offered a fresh start. Yet even there, the shadow of the Manhattan Well murder followed him in whispers and rumors. For the Sands family, particularly Catherine Ring, Elma's cousin and closest confidant, the trial's outcome was devastating. Catherine had been the last person to see Elma alive, and her testimony during the trial had painted a picture of betrayal and heartbreak. She believed firmly in Levi's guilt and never forgave the justice system for what she considered a miscarriage of justice. The family carried their grief like a wound that refused to heal. Elma's story became part of family lore, retold with sorrow and anger. The young woman who once dreamed of marriage and stability was now remembered as a symbol of innocence destroyed. The Sands family, like many in their community, remained convinced that justice had been denied. As often happens when tragedy collides with mystery, folklore took root. Locals began to claim that Elma's spirit haunted the area of the Manhattan Well. Passers-by whispered about hearing cries in the night, a woman's sobs rising from the depths of the well. Some said they saw a pale figure hovering near the site, her face twisted with sorrow and rage. Legend of Elma's ghost became a cautionary tale in the city. Parents warned their children about the dangers of misplaced trust. Couples whispered her name as a reminder of the fragile line between love and betrayal. The well itself, once an unremarkable feature of the neighborhood, became infamous. Even after it was filled in and the area built over, the legend endured, woven into the ghost stories of old New York. The Manhattan Well murder trial was more than just a sensational event. It was a landmark in American legal history. It is widely recognized as the first recorded murder trial in the United States to be fully documented by a court stenographer. William Coleman, who later became the editor of the New York Evening Post, kept detailed transcripts, ensuring that future generations could examine the proceedings. The involvement of Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr as defense attorneys was another remarkable aspect. At the time, the two men were fierce political rivals. Yet in this trial, they stood side by side to defend Levi Weeks. Their collaboration was temporary and tactical, but it underscored the unique nature of the case. For Hamilton and Burr, the trial added to their legacies. Hamilton's meticulous cross-examination and Burr's sharp legal mind were both on display. However, their role in securing Levi's freedom also left them vulnerable to criticism. To some, they were brilliant defenders of justice. To others, they were powerful men exploiting their talents to protect the privileged. The Manhattan Well murder also reflected the anxieties of a rapidly growing city. At the turn of the 19th century, New York was transforming from a modest colonial port into a bustling urban center. Population growth, economic opportunity, and social diversity created new possibilities but also new tensions. The case highlighted issues of gender, class, and morality. Elma Sands, a young woman of modest means, was judged not only as a victim, but also through the lens of societal expectations about female virtue. Rumors about her relationship with Levi painted her alternately as a naive innocent or a reckless young woman who had overstepped social boundaries. This dual judgment reflected the double standards women faced, where their reputations could be tarnished even in death. At the same time, the trial fed into debates about privilege. Levi's acquittal, aided by powerful defenders, reinforced public fears that justice favored the wealthy and well-connected. These concerns resonated deeply in a society struggling to define itself in the wake of independence. The case became a microcosm of the larger tensions shaping America's early years. Though Levi lived for decades after the trial, his story largely disappeared from the public eye. He never returned to New York and instead sought obscurity in the American South. Some accounts suggest he eventually married and lived quietly, far from the place where his name had once dominated headlines. But history never fully let him go. His name remained tethered to the Manhattan well murder, ensuring that no matter how quietly he lived, he would always be remembered as the man once accused of killing Elma Sands. Whether guilty or innocent, he was defined by that single chapter of his life. If Levi's story faded, Elma's did not. She became part of New York's cultural memory, her fate retold in stories, pamphlets, and later history books. To many, she was not just a victim of violence but also a symbol of injustice. Her name lived on in the whispers of ghost stories, the pages of trial transcripts, and the hearts of those who believed her voice had been silenced too soon. The Manhattan well murder case serves as a reminder of how society constructs memory. Elma, in her tragic end, became immortalized, while Levi, who lived far longer, became a shadow in history. This imbalance illustrates the enduring power of stories shaped by public sentiment and unresolved questions. Over 2 centuries later, the Manhattan well murder continues to capture attention. Historians, true crime enthusiasts, and storytellers return to it because it embodies so many themes: love, betrayal, justice, privilege, and the supernatural. It is both a crime story and a cultural artifact. The trial highlighted the importance of recorded legal proceedings, set precedents for defense strategies, and revealed the complexities of early American society. But beyond these broader lessons, it remains a human story. About a young woman whose life ended too soon, a young man who was forever marked by suspicion, and a city grappling with questions of justice it has never fully resolved. The Manhattan well murder is not merely a forgotten case from 1799. It is a prism through which we can view early American life, law, and culture. Its legacy is both haunting and instructive. The story of Levi Weeks and Elma Sands continues to raise questions without clear answers. Was justice served or was it denied? Did truth prevail, or was it buried at the bottom of a well along with Elma's body? In the end, perhaps the enduring power of this case lies not in resolution, but in its mystery. It invites each generation to look again, to reconsider the evidence, and to debate what really happened on that cold December night. And as long as people are drawn to tales of crime, love, and betrayal, the Manhattan well murder will never be forgotten.